Please welcome, from Forrester Research, Principal Customer Experience Analyst, Rick Parrish.
Good morning, everybody. Good to be with you here. I am Rick Parrish, and I'm here to talk to you this morning about the state of CX in 2018. I'm going to talk about how companies are doing in the world of CX, primarily in the US. I'm going to talk a little bit about Canada, too. And then I'm going to talk about what companies need to do strategically from a big picture to really start getting better. To do that, I'm going to talk about kind of three topics for you here. First of all, I sort of previewed the big theme. Yeah, CX is languishing, right? More about that in a minute. Then talk about, as I say, when you need to start getting better, you've got to do it systematically. Right? This is going to be the difference. I'm going to linger on this a bit when we get there, but this difference between doing a lot of CX-related stuff and actually focusing where it matters. Right? And there's a big difference there. And then I'm going to end with sort of three pieces of real practical advice, things that you can take back to your offices tomorrow and do yourselves without any big new line item budgets or any big program management to start improving the quality of CX at your companies right now. So I am going to start by talking a lot about, as I say, the actual state of CX, primarily in the US, also in Canada. And to do that, I'm going to talk a lot about data. I'm not going to put a lot of numbers on the screen, but we're going to talk a lot about data. And I'm going to say some things that some people in the room probably aren't going to be overjoyed with. Right? So because of that, I want to spend a minute and I want to talk about how we're measuring the quality of the customer experience. First of all, what are we measuring when we measure CX? We measure this: how customers perceive their interactions with an organization. That's what we mean when we say CX. Now, a lot of you here in the room might understand that when we say CX, we don't mean just a synonym for customer service. Right? CX is not just some new buzzword for customer service. It's something very different. Right? And so I want to spend a second explaining that so we can talk about what we're measuring when we talk about the quality of CX. First of all, three big differences between customer service and customer experience. The old style of customer service thinking is entirely from the organization's perspective. Right? It's when you say, hey, customer, here's what we're doing for you, or with you, or to you. Right? But the fact is, and you know this from being customers yourselves, customers don't care what you claim to be doing for them or with them or to them. They only care about what the quality of the experience with you is from their perspective. And that's the big difference, because the CX discipline looks at this from, as we say, the outside in, the customer's perspective inward. That's the first point right there. How customers perceive their interactions with an organization. You don't get to argue with that. And believe me, I've seen companies try. No. You really actually like this. No, this is really helpful. No, everything's great. You can't argue with the customer's perspective. The way they say it is the way it is. It's their experience. Second, the old style of customer service thinking tends to look at creating experiences for customers as a sort of expensive necessity. Right? It's a cost leader. Right? There are these things called customers out there. We got to do something for them. So we might as well, but let's do as little as possible because it's costing us money. Right? And we have to focus, right, these interactions. When we do as little as possible, let's just focus on sort of two areas. Let's focus on point of sale or point of service, right, POS, and support. Right? And let's ignore the rest of the relationship. But CX understands, first of all, that there is a whole customer journey. In fact, the whole customer life cycle that constitutes the entire relationship, which is the entire customer experience. Yes, point of sale, point of service is important. Yes, support is important. Those are the central moments of the customer organization relationship. But there's a whole relationship out there, and CX focuses on the whole thing. And CX also understands that when you focus on the whole thing, you broaden that aperture, and you put the resources behind it to create a great experience, you're not spending money. You're creating what's called a force multiplier. Force multiplier is just a military term that means something that makes everything else work better. And our research shows that organizations that focus on the quality of the customer experience operate more efficiently. They run more smoothly. Put another way, it's cheaper to provide a good experience than it is to provide a bad one. Right? That's what I mean when I say force multiplier. And that's what I'm talking about when I talk about customer experience. That's what I talk about when I talk about what we're measuring. So how do we measure it? Right? We measure it with something we call a customer experience index. Right? And this is where we get into the nitty-gritty of why I say the quality of CX is languishing in the US. Not doing that much better in Canada, maybe a little bit better. What's the whole point of improving customer experience? Is it just to get people to like you? Is it merely for people to say, I was satisfied? Is it merely for people to say, I'm happy or delighted or whatever emotion word your company happens to use? No. The whole point of improving customer experience is to drive customer loyalty. That's why we do this. Right? And so when we measure the quality of the customer experience, we're not just measuring if people like you. We're measuring how well the experiences you provide drive the 3 kinds of customer loyalty. Right? That's what I'm talking about here. Right, if you look over here on the left, we measure quality along these 3 axes. We call these the 3 E's: effectiveness, ease, and emotion. Right? Effectiveness and ease, those are pretty easy. Right? People have to be able to get the value out of the experience that they want to get. Not the value you want them to get, the value they want to get. They have to be able to accomplish what they're trying to accomplish, not what you wish they were trying to accomplish. Second, it can't be difficult. But third, emotion. Customers have to walk away feeling good about the experience. They have to walk away feeling the way they need to feel. Doesn't matter what industry you're in. Especially when I talk to folks in financial services and in government, they get nervous with this notion of emotion. Doesn't matter. You're in B to B, you're in B to C, you're in B to G. You pick a letter and then pick another letter. Doesn't matter where you are. We've studied it. Insofar as your customers are human, the emotional component of the experience is the most important. You can have the easiest, most effective experience in the world, but unless people walk away feeling the way they need to feel, they're not going to say it was great. Ease, effectiveness, emotion, the 3 E's of CX. And over here on the right, over there, the 3 types of customer loyalty. Retention, the likelihood that a customer is going to continue to do business with you. Enrichment, the likelihood they're going to do more business with you. And advocacy, the likelihood they're going to tell other people. Right? And it's these 6 components we measure, and we combine together using an algorithm to create what we call the CX index, and that's how we measure the quality of the customer experience. It's a number from 0 to 100, right, across 13 different channels, depending on industry, 40 to 75 different drivers. Right? So when I tell you the story about the state of CX that I'm about to tell you, this is the data I'm using to tell it. Not merely CSAT, not merely NPS, right? But looking at the way the ease, effectiveness, and emotion of the experience drives retention, enrichment, and advocacy across 13 channels. Story isn't good. Remember earlier, right when I got started, maybe you didn't hear me because my mic was hanging around somewhere around my belt buckle. But what I said was that companies do a lot of CX stuff, but most of it isn't the right stuff. And so they're just spinning their wheels. And so despite the fact that so many companies are clawing and scrabbling their way towards CX, we see stagnation, right? This is the distribution of scores from 0 to 100 across the CX index, measuring how well the quality of the experience drives customer loyalty. Not really well. And look, this is literally a picture of stagnation. Those bars aren't moving up. Very poor has been 3%, 2%. Poor is about the same, within 3% of each other. All right. Okay bumped up a little bit this year. Good and excellent. We had one brand that was excellent. We gave it the benefit of the doubt, rounded up to 1%, because this is on 300 brands across the US year over year. That one brand just made it into the excellent category, then dropped out. Right? So what we're looking at here is, as you can see, as the bars on the edges decline over time, the bar in the middle starts to go up just a little bit. That's stagnation. Companies aren't getting better. What we want to see is these bars getting shorter and these bars over here getting a lot bigger. And if you were to just listen to the talk about all the stuff that companies say they're doing, that's what you'd see. But we don't see it. That's why I say a lot of spinning the wheels, companies mistaking action for progress. Right? I also mentioned here, differentiation is evaporating. Right? Again, that when you start to see that slow regression to the mean, the very worst maybe getting a little bit better, the best getting a little worse, right? That's less and less differentiation slowly over time. That's not a great picture. Let me dig into the industry level, because we cover 19 industries. All right. This is the state in 2018, this year, across those 19 industries. The way to look at this chart is the little green diamonds, that's the industry average. And the little barbell, we call this the barbell chart, is the point spread. And as you can see here, the point spreads in most industries are pretty narrow. And they're continuing to get narrower and narrower over time. If I were to show you a year over year, which gets really messy really fast, you could just imagine it. They're just getting shorter and shorter and shorter. That means, again, differentiation slowly evaporating as you get this regression to the mean. Right. And by the way, brands are not evenly distributed along those lines. Let me just take, for instance, the US federal government, way down there near the bottom. Hey, it's doing better than internet service providers. Congratulations, Washington. But you know what? It's only because of the National Park Service, which is up here. Take that away, and the average drops way down, right? But in most brands, they're distributed mostly on either a bell curve, where you got a whole chunk of brands in the middle, very little differentiation there, or it's what you'd call bimodal, right, which is a bunch on the bottom and a bunch on the top. And again, no differentiation. Right? That's a rough situation to be in, and it's been this way year after year after year. Just in case you were wondering, any particular industry isn't moving that much year over year either. This is 2017 to 2018. A few industries went up, a little bit. A few industries went down, a little bit. There's just not a lot of action. Let me drive the point home even more, because a lot of times people say, well, you know, that might be the sort of general picture, but, you know, there are these companies up at the top, you know, that we all look up to as the real leaders in the quality of customer experience. It's brands like this. We call these the elites, the top 5% of the CX index. All right? They've all been stagnant. All but 2 of these 16 brands. These are the top brands in the country for CX. They've all been stagnant for 3 years. There are only 2 that have not been stagnant. Remember a minute ago, I said there did one brand that had been excellent, but it dropped backwards? Right? It was USAA's credit card business. Dropped backwards. And Huntington National Bank down there at number 10, they went up a couple of points. That's it. Other than that, total stagnation. Right? These are the companies that we're looking up to. And they're not going anywhere either. They're stuck in a rut too. Arguably, their rut is maybe a little higher than some other ruts, but they're still not going anywhere. Now, by the way, some people are going to say, well, you know, customer expectations are skyrocketing. They're not. They're creeping upward, but it's not like you have to scrabble to chase them. Right? They're slowly rising. But the whole thing about CX work is that it's like paddling upriver. Right? If you're not rowing faster than the current, you're going backward. And there is a slow current upward. Right? But you can't just be improving, you have to be improving faster than the current. Right? And so my point here is all these brands that we look up to as the top, they're not going anywhere either. They're stuck in a rut too. Right? Even at the industry level, yeah, I'm not going to talk about everyone on here. The point I want to make here is that even if you look at all the industry frontrunners, beyond the elites, right? Because as you can imagine, if you're the top internet service provider, you're not a top brand in the whole CX index. You're lower to the bottom, but you're still the best of the bunch, right? Most of them are flat year over year. Now, you're going to see some on here that are a little bit different, right? You get down here, hey, look at internet service providers. It's been changing year over year. Car rental providers, little change. Digital retailers, little change. All these elites for this year, still stagnant. So what's with the changes? last year's leaders got worse. Right? This year's leaders at the industry level didn't get any better. Last year's leaders got worse. They are all stuck in a rut too. So I guess my point here, if you want to make it a sort of positive message, is if you feel like you're stuck in a rut, if you feel like you're spinning your wheels, you're not alone. Right? The companies you may be looking up to for CX leadership, they're in the same rut as well. In fact, we've done some analysis, and you'll notice, by the way, I've been trying to avoid using the term leader, right? Because when I think of a CX leader, I think of a company that's not just stuck at the top, but a company that rises to the top and then keeps getting better. I mean, that's what a leader is, right? A leader is somebody who goes somewhere and people follow. There are 0 brands that have done that. No brand in the US or Canada, we're going to see Canada data in a minute, has risen to the top and then continued to improve. So when I say there are no real CX leaders, that's what I mean. Instead, we have 4 other L's. Yes, we did have a bit of fun making sure that all 5 types of companies started with the letter L. Languishers. Companies that got better, like the industry frontrunners we were just talking about, like the elites we were just talking about, but then got stuck. They're languishing. About 10% of companies in the US and in Canada gotten good and got stuck. Then there are the lapsers, right? These are the companies that got good and then fell backward, like many industry frontrunners. Many of last year's industry frontrunners aren't frontrunners this year. They got good, then they got worse, about 20%. Then the bulk, right? The plurality of companies, 48% locksteppers. The locksteppers are what I kind of think of as the plankton of the CX world. They just kind of go with the current. Sometimes things go a little bit up, sometimes they go a little down, sometimes they swirl around a little bit, not really going anywhere, just kind of doing their thing, right? 48%. And then the laggards, 23%. Unfortunately, these are the brands that started out not so great and have stayed not so great. Right? And so that's what I mean. Sometimes I say there are no real CX leaders, and somebody gets kind of upset with me. And they say, we've had a whatever CSAT score. We've had a 92% CSAT score in my company for the last 12 years. Wow, you've had 92 for the last 12 years. Where's your 93? Where's your 95? That's no leader. That's just a rut. Right? So that's what I'm talking about here when I say no real CX leaders. In fact, I'm going to dig in just a little bit deeper here because, remember, earlier I mentioned we cover CX in 13 different channels. And we divide those channels into 2 types, digital channels, email, website, mobile app, chatbot, digital stuff. And then what we would call physical channels or non-digital channels. This is things like talking to somebody on the phone, right? Postal mail, in person, right? Non-digital, physical, take your pick. I already mentioned the overall quality of CX is flat. Great. But let's look at channels in particular. How about physical channels? Just where the person is interacting with one or more non-digital channels. That's been flat too. 69, 68, 69, that's flat. How about just digital? That's not a story we often see. People who interacted with one or more digital channels only for the interaction they're measuring. Maybe it was just the website. Maybe it was a website and then an IVR system and then a mobile app. Right? Maybe it was a kiosk and then they went to the mobile app and then they went to the IVR system. One or more digital channels, digital experience only. Still flat. There's only one kind of CX that's gone up. It's what we call hybrid CX. An interaction in which the person has engaged with at least one digital and one physical channel. What I mean here is maybe they started on the website and then they called up to talk to a person. Or maybe they went into a physical store and then they went to the mobile app. At least one digital, at least one physical channel. That's the only kind of CX that's continued to improve. Now you may say to yourself, not by much, it's only a 2-point difference. To which I say, I'm not going to get into all the numbers on this, but we've done a lot of modeling, we've done a lot of real-world studies on this. Depending on what industry you're in and the size of your company, 1 point of quality in CX improvement can mean tens of millions or even hundreds of millions of dollars in incremental revenue, right? So those 2 points are massive. Those 2 points are a canyon between the quality of hybrid experiences and other experiences. Now, I'm not saying find ways to get people to combine channels. What I'm saying is, at the moment, purely digital and purely physical experiences aren't being effective, easy, and emotionally engaging, at least not as much as hybrid CX is. That's the situation in the US. In Canada, well, you know, our friends to the north are actually doing a little bit better, right? And not a lot better, but a little bit. Here's what I mean. Hey, look at that. Let me just focus your attention right there. That's the opposite of what we saw in the good category in the US. Things are slowly getting better for Canadian CX. Good for them. Unfortunately, there's still little differentiation in most industries, just like in the US. And that differentiation is also getting a little narrower. And when you start to see more and more brands moving up at the same rate, there's still very little differentiation. What I mean here is, let's say you improve your CX index score by 5 points, and then everybody else in your industry improves by 5 points. Well, it doesn't really matter, does it? Because there's still no differentiation, everybody's still the same. That's what we're actually seeing in Canada. Incremental movements upward, but for most companies. And that's good. I'm happy to see that. But if you're trying to strategize for your particular brand, that's not a good story. You want to move up more than your competitors do. We're not seeing that in Canada. Everybody's moving up at about the same kind of pace, right? And just to round out the story here for Canada, very little movement at the industry level. Nothing statistically significant except in auto manufacturers. Right? You could call that stagnation too, but I like to look on the bright side and see that incremental movement upward, right, that I showed a couple slides ago. That's a pretty good story. It also shows that it can be done, because I've had people tell me it can't be done. Canada shows that it can. By the way, if I were to show you some data from Singapore or from India or from Australia or from any of the other countries we study, you'd also see a little bit more of that story too. So, CX performance is going to continue to get worse in many cases. It's going to continue to stagnate in others. Right? For instance, in the US this year, 37 brands got better, but 40 got worse. Small movements in both cases, right? And as I've said a couple of times, the problem here is that companies aren't doing things systematically. They're just throwing stuff at the wall, seeing what sticks. Which creates a couple of problems. First of all, it means that improving the quality of CX isn't efficient. They're wasting huge amounts of money. Second, it makes it hard to reproduce what led to your success, because you're not really sure. So we've done a lot of work on this, and we've figured out, what do companies that not only provide the right quality of CX, but that provide it reliably and efficiently and continue to get better, what do they actually do? Right? And it's that reliably and efficiently that I want to emphasize for a second here, because there are plenty of ways to provide the right CX by accident. We see this in plenty of companies, especially startups. You know, when it's just you and a couple of guys you live with, you know, in the basement, creating a mobile app for you and your friends, it's pretty easy to understand what your customers want, because your customers are you. That's not scalable, nor is it efficient. Then you get these other companies that have this really nasty hero culture. Right? This is when a company says, hey, Rick, we had an employee drive her personal vehicle overnight to deliver a replacement part to a client because we couldn't ship it in time. Or, hey, Rick, we have a team that comes in on the weekends because they're so dedicated to improving the quality of the experience, they take weekend time to work on improving this or that. Aren't you impressed? No, of course I'm not impressed. That's terrible. Right? That kind of destructive hero culture is super inefficient. It's not scalable or reproducible. You're going to burn out and drive away your very best employees. Right? So I'm not just talking about how to provide a great CX momentarily or accidentally or bankrupt yourself in the process. I'm going to talk about the things you got to do to provide the right CX and start moving that needle like they do a bit in Canada, like they do a bit elsewhere. Start improving reliably and efficiently. It's what we call the 6 competencies of CX management. They are research, prioritization, design, enablement, measurement, and culture. There's a lot of detail beneath here, but I'm going to talk about it at this level, the level of these 6 competencies of CX management. Offer you a couple of examples of each one so you can really see what we're talking about here when I talk about focusing on the things that actually matter to improve the quality of CX. Research. First of all, you've got to understand your customers as people, right? And then communicate that understanding throughout your ecosystem. What I mean here is lots of companies understand their customers as cells on a spreadsheet. You know, some sort of basic marketing segmentation or something. That's fine. But consider this. Born in 1948, grew up in the UK, married, 2 kids, wealthy person, celebrity, likes dogs, goes to the Alps on vacation. That's the sort of level of knowledge of their customers that most companies tend to have above and beyond the web analytics and that sort of thing. Anybody want to take a guess at who this person is? Can anybody figure out just from this information who this person is? I mean, like as a person? Do we want to yell one out? Yeah, it's both of those people. Right? Arguably, 2 very different people who want different things out of a brand, who want to engage with brands in different ways, or want their assistants to engage with brands in different ways, right? You don't get that level of knowledge of your customers unless you really dig in and use both qualitative and quantitative research. Get inside their heads and inside their lives. Understand how what you provide fits into their lives, how they want it to fit into their lives, right? Really know them as people, right? I'm going to give you an example of a company that's done really well with that, Blue Cross Blue Shield of Michigan. One of the things they did a few years ago is they took all of that qualitative and quantitative research that they did about their customers to understand their customers as people. And what they figured out was that really one of the most crucial things about their sort of key customer, this guy, they call him Mike. They don't have like a fancy segmentation name for him. They call him Mike. Mike's his name. And they figured out that one of the real crux of the issue for Mike is making healthcare decisions, right? And trying to understand the documentation and planning for next year and all that sort of thing. And he does this in a home office. And so, based on research, they didn't just send people out to yard sales to bring stuff in. Based on research, they created a mock-up of Mike's home office. And they use this for onboarding. They use this for periodic retraining. They use this so that designers can sit in that chair and live in Mike's world for just a minute to get inside his head. Right? He's got the singing bass, circa 1998. He's got, right? The resolution isn't great here, so I don't know if you can tell. That's a Cabela's hat, right? Mike is not an REI man. Right? He's not an LL Bean man. He's a Cabela's man. That matters. How about the size of the font on the bill? Notice he's got one of these calculators here with the big old numbers on it. Probably a lot bigger than the font on the bill you're sending Mike. Right? He can't read the thing. Right? That's what I'm talking about, understanding your customers as people and their world and getting inside their heads. Right? And to do this, there's a lot of different kinds of research you can do. I'm not saying you got to do all this different kinds of research. What I'm saying is companies do surveys, and surveys are vital. Companies do focus groups, and there's like 1,000 ways to get those wrong and only 1 or 2 ways to get those right. Chances are, using one of the wrong ways, that's for another time. Sure, focus groups are fine. My point is there's a ton of different kinds of research you can use, quantitative and qualitative, to understand your customers, get beyond that spreadsheet level, understand more at that mic level. Right, so I encourage you to think creatively about how to research customers. Second, prioritization. You can't do everything. And this is one of the problems. Companies, they want to do everything for CX. But if you try to focus everywhere, you focus nowhere. And so you don't actually make progress on anything. You've got to prioritize what's most important for your most important customers and for your business's success. Right? CX is a thing. It's not the only thing. Right? You've got the employee experience. You've got the experience of all the other stakeholders in the ecosystem. Yes, you have the customer experience. Right? You have other business priorities. You've got to triangulate all that and figure out how to make all that play together. Right? That's what I'm talking about when I say prioritization. Let me give you an example here. HSBC Canada, it's a picture of one of their contact centers. HSBC Canada was prioritizing their CX work the way a lot of companies do. What they used to do was they used to prioritize their CX fixes based on the loudest complainers, right? Based on the most frequent complaints. They weren't seeing the CX benefits of that, which, as you can imagine, made them really nervous about this whole CX thing anyways. This whole CX thing just bunk? We're making all kinds of improvements. We're not seeing any retention, enrichment, advocacy gains. What's going on? Then they did the analysis and they figured out those most frequent, loudest complainers were also the customers with the lowest amount of investable assets, the lowest amount of assets that were sort of bankable, right? They were the worst customers. Let me just put it that way, right? And so what they figured out was that the higher value customers weren't having necessarily a better experience, but they weren't complaining about it. The problem is their experience was going wrong in ways that were different from the lower value customers. And so as HSBC Canada was focused on just merely stopping complaints, what they were doing is they were improving the experience for people who could not possibly show any greater loyalty, retention, enrichment, or advocacy, and ignoring the people who could. So when I'm talking about prioritization, sure, all customers are important. Of course they are, but you can't do everything. You have to focus where you're going to make gains. Right? And so what HSBC Canada did was what a lot of companies should do. Instead of focusing on merely stopping complaints, figure out which complaints are the most important. Which complaints come from the most important customers, which complaints are going to drive the best loyalty, and focus your attention there. The gold standard for prioritization is USAA. Yes, I spent a couple minutes talking about how they're stuck in a rut like everybody else, but on the other hand, it is a really good rut. How do they do that? They focus. Now, if you're a USAA customer, you'll know that they've broadened the aperture a little bit in recent years, but they're still really focused on active duty service members, veterans, and their immediate families. If you don't meet that group, you could have all the money in the world. They're not going to do business with you. They're not interested. They have curated an experience specifically for this core group of customers. And as they understand those customers as people deeply, right, they focus on things that are going to improve the experience for them. And here's the trick. No doubt, if you have your bank's mobile app, you have that remote check cashing feature thing. You know, you take a picture of the check, right, and it deposits it. It's not check cashing, it's check depositing. That would be pretty cool, actually, if you could cash it remotely. So that's my idea. Nobody take that. How did they come up with that? Well, they focused on their absolute most important customer, a recently commissioned lieutenant in the US Army. They figured out that's the customer they're going to get the greatest lifetime value from. Ignore everybody else. Focus on that person. And what they figured out was, this is a few years back, that this was a major pain point, depositing a paper check when you're not near a bank branch. And so they came up with the mobile check depositing feature in the mobile app. And it works so well for everybody that now we all have it, right? Every bank deployed it everywhere, right? And so when you focus on the most important customers, you don't necessarily ignore everybody. You get spin-off effects. Remember that force multiplier effect I talked about earlier? Companies that focus on improving the quality of the CX, when they prioritize and they do what's going to count the most, you get all kinds of spin-off efficiencies, rather than just trying to be all things to all people. Now, I'm not saying you need to prioritize to that level. But what I am saying is that if you just want to try to be, again, all things to all people, you just want to be sort of meh, you want to be the meh for everybody company, that's a strategy. Sure it is, right? But you're not going to reap the benefits of really prioritizing the power of CX, right? Among all those other business benefits, the employee experience, the experience of other people throughout the ecosystem, you're not going to get the benefits that you could get through that force multiplier effect. Design. You gotta make the thing, right? You've got to build the experience. And when I say design, yes, we've all heard the term, human-centered design and an iterative design process, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not going to show you that slide from the Stanford D School with the hexagons, right? You've seen that slide before. What I'm going to say is that in too many companies, experiences, especially legacy companies, experiences just sort of accrete out of the ether, right? And just end up getting sort of cobbled together. They're not created intentionally in any way. That's the core of what I'm talking about here when we talk about design. You've got to start with a blank sheet of paper and design the experience from the customer's perspective inward, right? What does the customer want? What are they trying to do? How do I build what they interact with? What goes behind that? What goes behind that? What goes behind that? What goes behind that? Deep into the ecosystem. Right? That's what I'm talking about when I talk about design. And it's got to be based not just on some random notion, but on a real vision. Notice, you've no doubt noticed sort of vision at the center here. This is when I want to say a word about vision. You've got to define what good means. I see this a lot with companies where they say, even sometimes companies that they really mean well, they throw a bunch of money at their people and they say, go, make CX better, do it. But they never define what better means. And so what you end up with is this business unit does one thing and this business unit does another thing, and you end up with a more disjointed experience than when you started, because they interpret good differently. They're designing to different goods. You have to create a vision that defines what good CX means, and have that be the North Star that people use when they intentionally create experiences from the outside in. I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about here. One of my favorite examples, this comes from Canada. This example is IRCC, Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada. It's a government organization. And this is something that's going on right now. They figured out last fall, that they had a real problem at IRCC. A lot of recent immigrants, a lot of refugees, right? And a lot of them were going through the citizenship process. Great. But the problem was a lot of those people were dropping out of the citizenship process toward the end. They're just disappearing. And IRCC did the research to their credit, and they figured out what the problem was. They figured out that there were sort of two key points in the customer experience for their customers, their recent immigrants, recent refugees. The test that you have to take, the citizenship test, and then the swearing-in ceremony. And people weren't showing up for those. Why weren't they showing up for those? Well, the reason why they weren't showing up was because they had to work. Well, so you might think, oh, well, that's easy. And IRCC had a really personal process. They had this notion. Remember I said, experiences just kind of accrete out of the ether. They'd had this notion that had sort of arisen over time that people wanted a really kind of deep personal engagement, with their caseworker. Right? And so the process to reschedule your test or your swearing-in ceremony was, you call your caseworker. They might even come over. You have a chat and you talk it through, and it's supposed to be really, deeply engaging. It was really, really embarrassing is what it was. They didn't even realize this, but they did the research and they figured out these recent immigrants, they were so thankful to Canada, right, for letting them in. and for welcoming them and helping them, wanting them to become Canadians themselves. That when they turned out, like, I've got to go to work. It's an hourly job. I can't just not show. It's not like I got sick days. It's not like I'm salaried. They had to go to work so they could feed their kids. They couldn't make it to the test or the ceremony. They were mortified. And they sure as hell didn't want to have somebody come over and have to say it to their face. The same person who welcomed them off the plane a few weeks ago. So they redesigned the entire process. Yes, you can engage with a person if you want to, but it's at arm's length. Yes, you can do it purely digitally if you want to, so you don't actually ever have to talk to a person, right? Options to get rid of that embarrassment. Right? They're still piloting the program right now, but it's going super great. They've intentionally designed the experience. They've made it more digital, right? It's still easy, effective, and especially that third E, emotion. It's got the right emotional quotient. And as a result, in the pilot program, they're seeing much better completion rates for the citizenship process. That's what I'm talking about with design. But design is more than that, too. Design is also about designing the tools that your employees use to create those experiences. Because if your tools aren't designed in a customer-centric way, your employees, that's where you get that hero culture, where employees have to fight against their own company to improve the quality of CX. That's neither efficient nor sustainable, right? You're actually going to hear from British Telecom, BT, later. And they have a really cool example that I think is really great. This is using eGain's AI solution. What they did was they designed their interface, again, from the outside in a way that foregrounds the things that customers need most. And by this is what, 10,000 contact center agents and personnel at over 600 retail locations? Right, that's big, right? When you think about the customer experiences that those employees are tasked with providing, they've got to have tools that are designed, intentionally designed from the outside in, from the customer's perspective inward. And something as seemingly simple as putting the things that matter most to the customer experience front and center, which a lot of companies don't do, can make a huge difference. That's part of design too. It's all got to be from the outside in, through the systems that employees use that customers experience only indirectly. Next, enablement. There's a big difference between designing an experience and actually making that experience go. Day after day, across thousands of employees, across hundreds of touch points. Right? Another way to put it is maybe no plan survives first contact with the enemy. Designing an experience is one skill set, but enabling, providing employees and partners with the tools and the resources and the training that they need to actually make that experience happen, that's an entirely different skill set. But when you do provide employees with the tools and the training and the resources they need, now you don't get that destructive hero culture. Now employees aren't frustrated. The employee experience gets a lot better. And as we know, the employee experience and the customer experience, that can be a virtuous cycle. One gets better, the other gets better. One gets better, the other gets better. It can also be a destructive cycle. Less said about that, the better. And actually, the example I want to use to talk about this is actually a continuation of what I just said, that BT example, right? When you give your employees the tools they need, not more tools, not, hey, let's throw another tool on top of what you already got. I'm not talking about more tools, I'm talking about the right tools. Intentionally designed, you get some really cool benefits, right? So before giving employees the tool they needed, first call resolution, 62%. After giving employees the tool they need, first call resolution, 85%. What does that say? 23-point improvement? That's big, right? Customer satisfaction, we've got 30-point increase in Net Promoter Score, and also important to the employee experience and the customer experience, look at that, 50% improvement in speed to competency. Those are crazy numbers, but those numbers are what you can get when you master enablement, giving employees the tools they need to provide the experience you've designed. By the way, did a survey on this a couple of months ago. And I've found that when you ask employees, is the company providing you with the tools and the training and the resources you need to provide the right experience? The more senior the respondent, the more likely they are to answer yes. Frontline employees, it's like 20, 25% are saying, yeah, I'm being given the tools and the training and the resources I need. Folks in the C-suite, it's in like the mid-upper 80%. They're really positive about that. And so I don't know what your situation is, but however you might answer that question, I urge you to take your seniority into account when you think about how you're answering that question, when you're thinking about it yourselves. All right. Measurement. You've got to quantify the quality of the experience, and then you have to link it to your organization's success. To do that, you need 3 kinds of metrics. First of all, you need descriptive metrics. Descriptive metrics are simply what happens when the customer interacts. So what happened? They called, they were on hold for 12 seconds, they talked to Bob. They went to the website, they clicked here, they clicked buy, they went to the shopping cart, they abandoned. Whatever, just what they did. Then you need perception metrics. How they perceive what they just went through. This is the real CX-y part of the CX-ness here. The ease, the effectiveness, the emotion. However your surveys, however your other research is getting at that. And then you need outcome metrics. Simply what customers did as a result. When you have these 3 kinds of metrics, what that allows you to do is it allows you to see what you're doing, how that's impacting the quality of the experience, and then crucially, the outcome, look at the business result. Because after all, you need to justify your CX investments. And this is where I see so many companies go wrong. They're just not able to make the case because they haven't made the link between what's happening and how customers feel about what's happening to customer behavior. So think about it this way. When you have these 3 kinds of metrics, you get to figure things out like, let's say the customer calls, I'll use a simple contact center example. Let's say the customer emails the contact center, and it takes them an hour to hear back. And then on a survey, they rate you a 9 out of 10. And in the next 6 months, they're 75% of the time they're gonna do business with you again. Great. Now let's say they email and it takes 3 days to get back to them. And they rate you a 2 on the survey. And over the next 6 months, they never do business with you again. Now you're able to quantify that. Aha. The shorter amount of time it takes to email people back, the more likely they are to do business with us at a certain dollar amount. Now you can start justifying expenses. Okay, I project that we can make, if we answer everyone's email within 2 hours, we can grow our revenue by $250 million next year. Great, now what's it going to take to get that email response time down to that couple of hours? How much is that going to cost? Then you do the math, and you know whether the investment's worth it or not. It's a sort of modeling you can do when you have these 3 kinds of metrics. And one thing I want to point out is, a lot of times companies say, we don't have these 3 kinds of metrics. There's nothing we can do. I bet you do. And if you don't, I bet you have pretty good proxies for those metrics. Most companies I work with, they can cobble something together that works out pretty well. Right? Pardon me. And actually figure out what's really going to improve things. That example I just used about how long it takes to email people back, that's a pretty easy example. But this one government client I work with, the General Services Administration, they gathered all 3 kinds of metrics, and that saved them wasting a huge amount of money. Because their hypothesis was, if we answer people back in a shorter amount of time, it's going to improve their customer loyalty, and so we're going to make big money off that. Turned out to be not the case. It turned out that if you get back to people faster, it actually didn't change their behavior at all in the case of GSA. All you had to do was interact with them at the same speed, but in a more emotionally positive way. So having these 3 kinds of metrics actually saved GSA over $20 million a year because they didn't make a mistake. They had the data, they looked at the data, they figured out what's actually going to improve the quality of the experience. But having the data and using the data isn't enough, because after all, measurement isn't just about having numbers. Measurement is about driving action. And very few employees actually use CX measurement data to change their behavior. We see this all the time. Companies, they implement these big voice of the customer programs. They roll out these great dashboards. Nobody uses it. Right? You've got to think of your employees as internal customers, right? And design measurement communications in a way that's compelling to them, that's going to drive action. And Nationale Nederlanden is a really good example of this. It's a bank wealth management company in Europe. And one of the things they did was their culture, I'm not saying this is exactly the solution for everybody. What I'm saying is, for this particular company, they came up with something really interesting. They had a lot of measurement data, but nobody was using it to change their behavior. So what they did was they figured something out. They figured out, we here in this bank have a culture of very sort of people want to feel like insiders. And so what they did was they created a new measurement dashboard. And then what they did was they made that dashboard out of colors that were not in any of the company's other applications. As you can imagine, looking at the logo, all their applications were sort of orange, burnt umber, yellow kind of thing. Instead, they made this one like green, so you could really see it if it was on somebody's computer. And then they gave only a small number of employees a special code to access it. And what the company's leadership thought would happen actually happened. Somebody be walking past somebody's cubicle, and then they see this big shock of green on the screen, and they go, what is that thing? And the person would say, oh, this is just our new CX quality dashboard. I don't have access to that. Yeah, I know, I was given a special code. Right? And so what would happen? That other person, you go straight to your boss and say, I want that code too. Right? Oh, okay, here you go. Right? Don't tell anybody. Right? And before you know it, everybody wanted to be on this thing, and it became a sort of in-the-know kind of thing. Right? Again, maybe that's not the best way for you, but my point is design intentionally those employee experiences too, so that you don't just have numbers, people use numbers to drive behaviors. And finally, culture, right? We depict culture around the outside because culture is the environment in which the rest of this stuff occurs. Right? Without the right culture, nothing else is ever really going to gel. You're never going to get full mileage out of all your processes and all of your systems and all of the rest of the stuff. Now, people sometimes say this whole culture thing is really fuzzy. Right? Not like measurement, right? Not like design practices, not like research. It's not fuzzy. Right? A culture is made up of behaviors. It's made up of specific behaviors that are performed by specific people with a specific frequency over time. And in that way, culture is not fuzzy. It is knowable, it is measurable, it is testable. Right? You can change it. Right? A CX culture is all about getting employees to provide the right CX, not because a script tells them to say hello. Right? For instance, when you walk out of a convenience store and you see the sign on the door that says, "Thank you for shopping here," do you feel thanked? I don't feel thanked by that sign. Right? When I call a company and they say, "It's a great day here at company whatever, how can I help you?" I don't feel like it's a great day. I don't feel like they think it's a great day. I feel like that was just a script, right? That's not CX culture, right? CX culture is about helping employees understand why it's to their personal advantage, why it's to the company's advantage, why it's to the customer's advantage to have a good quality CX, the role they play in it, right? And to be empowered to do that, right? That's what a CX culture is about. And as I said, it's made up of specific behaviors. Hampton Inn figured out a few years back, what was the difference between properties that consistently provided a great experience and companies that didn't? They figured out, general managers, they figured some things out for other roles as well, But they figured out general managers are doing 9 things. Not 57 things. They didn't just throw up their hands and say whatever. They studied it. They brought it down to the level of behavior. What are managers doing? These 9 things. For instance, it used to be the rule at Hampton Inn where a general manager would have to have yesterday's financials into headquarters by 9 a.m. But the properties that were performing really well on CX weren't doing that. They weren't getting the stuff in by 9 a.m. Why weren't they getting the stuff in by 9 a.m.? Because they were at the breakfast buffet hanging out with customers, hanging out with guests, instead of in the back office running numbers. Right? That's behavior 1. Right? And so what they did was, by the way, they changed it. You can take till noon now with the numbers. Nobody cares. But the point is, right, they figured out the behaviors. They trained people on the behaviors. They hire people who are interested in these behaviors. And they do this across roles until it becomes, that's just how we do things here. It becomes culture. Sure, they actually give this card to general managers. You can carry it around in your coat pocket and remind yourself. Sure, but these managers know these behaviors. They're hired because they like these sorts of things. They're trained on these sorts of things. It's the way we do business. Right? That's what makes a culture. Identify customer-centric behaviors, hire people who want to do them, train them how to do them well, and then let them go. Right? That's a CX culture. So I said hire them. Yeah. Sometimes I tell people that, and people say, well, in some other company, in some other department, maybe you can worry about culture. Maybe you can worry about empathy. Right? Maybe you can worry about customer centricity. But here in my department, we need technical specialists. We need lawyers. We need accountants. We need software developers. We can't possibly worry about empathy. We can't possibly worry about customer centricity. To which I say, that. Did a round of research with some enterprise software companies last year. And one of the things I found is that more and more, not all of them, not even most of them, but more and more are hiring their software developers in 2 rounds. Round 1, a behavioral interview in which the job candidate has to prove that he or she is an empathetic, customer-centric person who is willing and able to put himself in the customer's shoes. And only then, after you prove that, do you get to show off what a hotshot coder you are. So if software companies can hire their developers based on empathy first, rather than coding skill first, no matter how technical your department or your company, you can do the same thing too. You can build a CX culture too. Maybe not in legal departments, but everywhere else, you can focus on empathy first. Those are the 6 competencies: research, prioritization, design, enablement, measurement, culture. That's what you got to do to become a real CX leader. Not just get good and then get stuck, but continue to improve. But those are big things. Those are 6 strategic level things, and they're going to take meetings, all right, and they're going to take budgets and on planning and program management, all that kind of stuff. So, as I said, I want to leave you with 3 things that you can take back to the office and just start doing that are going to improve the quality of the CX that your company provides. Improve the employee experience, too. First, model customer-centric behavior in your own work. You're going to have to start doing your job differently, especially if you're in a leadership position before other people are going to do their jobs differently. My favorite example comes from a company, one of the large retirement community chains in North America. They used to have this monthly executive level meeting with the heads of all the retirement communities where they'd sort of go around the room and talk profit and loss. All right, your P&L, yours, 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 yours. And then they realized this is just a public shaming ritual. Like, we're all following along on spreadsheets. We all have the numbers right in front of us. So what they decided to do was, said, you know what, let's just change this up. Instead, monthly meeting, we go around the room. Tell me a unique customer problem you ran into last month and how you solved it. Let's talk about it. Let's see if it worked. Let's see if we can make it standard procedure for the whole company. Maybe somebody has another idea on how to handle it. Right? Okay, now you go, now you go, now you go, now you go. Right? They made it. The executive team started doing their jobs differently. Right? And as you can imagine, the first thing that happened, every head of every retirement community said, I'm not going to be the only one without a story. They sent the word down the chain, send me customer stories. Now everybody's thinking about it. Right? And this was so popular, the executive committee didn't mandate anything, but the community heads, they started having a similar meeting structure. And it spread throughout this company to the case in which, in some cases, even individual shift change supervisors are having the same method of meeting as the leadership committee did. Right? Change the way you work, be more customer-centric in the way you do your job, you're going to inspire other people to do the same. Second, just start recognizing employees yourself, even behind the scenes ones for contributing to great CX. Yeah, most companies recognize frontline employees. That's great. And a sort of top-down award, lots of companies have these sort of quarterly or annual awards, employee of the month, that kind of thing. That's fine. It's fine. But our research shows, we've got a lot of data on this. My colleague Sam Stern does a lot of this work, that much more effective is peer-to-peer recognition. Right? And so you get companies like Southwest Airlines, where, yeah, I know the code's a little weird. It's because it's a screenshot from a video. It also looks disturbingly like my friend Ben. So every time I look at it, I'm like, hey, Ben's a pilot now. What this guy's doing is, he's a Southwest Airlines employee. Southwest Airlines gives its employees, and sometimes its customers, these little cards. They call them kicktail awards. And what you do is when you see another Southwest Airlines employee, even behind the scenes ones, doing something great for a customer, within boundaries, no hero culture here, specific behaviors. But when you see them doing really well at that, you hand them that card. Then at the end of, I think it's the end of the quarter, right, you get to take those cards. It's like when you played skee ball when you were a kid and you take the cards of the thing and you get like a little fluffy alligator and your sister stole it from you and you're still not bitter about it 42 years later. But, right, you get to use those cards to get something. And something that's meaningful to you. Yeah, sure, maybe you like electronics, and so they got some phones and some other gadgets and stuff for you. But maybe another option is, say, lunch with a member of the C-suite, or a day off of work to perform community service. You get that peer-to-peer recognition, and that's what this pilot's doing. He's actually jotting a little handwritten note for one of the baggage handlers, a behind-the-scenes employee who he noticed was doing something related to a pet in the cargo hold, right? And he's going to go hand it to him. Just say, hey, thanks a lot. I really appreciate it. Peer-to-peer. And you get the reward. You get to make that reward something meaningful to you. Right? Just start doing it. You're not going to be able to hand out lunch with the C-suite, but you can have that peer-to-peer recognition. You don't need to wait for a program. You don't need to wait for a line item. Just do it. And finally, if you forget everything else, it's entirely possible. Is my mic? Yes, okay. So it's impossible that maybe you heard nothing else the entire speech. Just remember this. You can start asking one question before you make a decision. How is what I'm about to do going to affect the quality of the customer experience? That's all. Just ask the question. It doesn't mean it has to be the only question you ask, but when you make decisions, you ask all kinds of questions. How is this going to affect the budget? How is this going to affect this thing? How is it going to affect this other thing? What about this other thing? I bet you don't ask this question. Just ask it. And when you start asking that question, now all of a sudden the customer's in the room, right? And when you start asking it of yourself and you start asking it of others, people are going to be thinking about it. And once you just make this normal, asking the question, you're well on your way to doing all of the other things and those 6 big things that I talked about earlier, and well on your way to becoming a real CX leader that rises to the top and continues to get better. Thanks, everybody.